Welcome to Shadow Frames, where forgotten images reveal their darkest secrets. Tonight we turn our attention to a peculiar photograph from the twilight years of the 19th century, a circus ensemble portrait that harbors a disturbing secret. The photograph in question dates back to 1895, a time when traveling circuses represented both entertainment and escape for communities across America. At first glance, the sepia-toned image appears unremarkable. 23 performers arranged in 3 neat rows, their faces beaming with apparent joy. Trapeze artists stand proud in their sequined costumes. Strongmen flex their impressive muscles. Clowns with painted smiles clutch props, and the ringmaster stands center, his top hat gleaming even in the monochrome capture. The photographer had positioned them against a painted backdrop of circus tents and carnival flags, typical of the portrait studios of that era. Judging by their costumes and the quality of the photograph, this appears to be one of the more successful touring companies, perhaps even the renowned Barnum and Bailey outfit, though no identifying banners are visible in the frame. What makes this image uniquely disturbing is what stands just behind the performers. A large, ornate mirror, likely part of a funhouse or illusion act, reflects the same group, but with one chilling difference. While the performers face the camera with broad smiles and cheerful expressions, their reflections tell a different story entirely. In the mirror, these same faces appear haunted, drawn, some even twisted in expressions of unmistakable anguish. A female acrobat's reflection has tears streaming down her cheeks. The strongman's mirror image shows a face gaunt with exhaustion rather than strength. Most disturbing is the clown, whose reflection bears an expression of such profound dread that it seems to stare directly at the viewer across the chasm of time. The juxtaposition is subtle enough that casual observers might miss it, but once noticed, it becomes impossible to unsee. These entertainers, whose livelihood depended on projecting joy and wonder, appear to be harboring profound suffering behind their professional facades. Historical records from that period speak of the often brutal conditions circus performers endured: grueling travel schedules, exploitative contracts, dangerous working conditions, and the perpetual pressure to smile regardless of personal circumstances. Many were immigrants or individuals who had fled difficult pasts, finding both refuge and a new form of captivity under the big top. What makes the photograph particularly unnerving is that no manipulation is evident. Photography in 1895 did not allow for the sophisticated alterations we might suspect today. The glass plate negative, recently discovered in an estate sale in New England, shows no signs of tampering. Was this merely a trick of light and angle, a photographic anomaly? Or did the mirror, perhaps part of the circus's illusion act, capture something more truthful about these performers than they wished to present to the world? Did the camera somehow preserve a moment when the boundary between performance and reality momentarily slipped, revealing the true faces behind the spectacle? After discovering the photograph, I spent months researching this particular circus troupe. Newspaper archives from 1895 revealed they performed under the name Magnificent Marvels, a mid-tier company that toured primarily through the Rust Belt and coal mining regions. Their final documented performance occurred in October of that year in a small Pennsylvania town before they seemingly vanished from the historical record altogether. What makes their disappearance more intriguing is that it coincided with several local newspaper reports of strange occurrences following their performances. In Harrisburg, 3 children reportedly developed identical night terrors after attending a show. In Altoona, a mining executive who'd sponsored their appearance was found wandering the train yards in a state of catatonia, repeatedly mumbling about the faces behind the faces. The mirror itself appears in promotional materials for the circus. Advertised as the truthful glass, it was featured in a specialized tent requiring a separate admission fee. According to surviving handbills, patrons could see their souls reflected back at them. While typical carnival hyperbole, the photograph suggests something more unsettling about this particular attraction. I tracked down the granddaughter of a former audience member who had preserved her grandmother's diary. The relevant entry dated September 12, 1895 reads, "Visited the Marvel show with Edward. Delightful acts, though the mirror exhibition left me deeply unsettled. The attendant insisted I look closely. but when my reflection appeared to weep while I smiled, I fled immediately. Edward laughed at my distress, calling it a clever illusion, but the ringmaster watched our departure with knowing eyes. The most compelling evidence came from county archives. Death certificates for 3 performers, the female acrobat, the strongman, and the lead clown, were filed within days of each other in late October, all in different states despite traveling together. The listed causes are suspicious: heart failure, respiratory collapse, and most troublingly, fright. Renowned photography experts have examined the original plate negative. They confirm no evidence of double exposure or other 19th century photographic manipulation techniques. The glass itself shows no scratches or chemical anomalies that might explain the discrepancy between subjects and reflections. Perhaps most disturbing was my discovery in the personal effects of the photographer, one Theodore Ambrose. His diary, now preserved in a university archive, contains this entry dated the day after the photograph was taken. Cannot sleep. Developed the circus portraits today. Something inexplicable on the plates. The mirror shows what I felt while working with them. A profound wrongness beneath their painted smiles. The ringmaster approached afterward, seemed pleased by my distress. He offered to buy all copies and negatives at 3 times my fee. I refused. Some truths must remain visible. The trove of documents I've assembled raises more questions than answers. What terrible burden did these performers carry? Was the mirror truly magical, or merely a catalyst that revealed their inner torment? And what became of the remaining 20 performers whose faces beam falsely at us across more than a century? Theodore Ambrose's refusal to surrender his negatives appears to have had consequences beyond his sleepless nights. In pursuing his trail through historical records, I discovered the photographer's studio mysteriously burned to the ground just 3 weeks after the circus performer's portrait was taken. Local newspapers reported Ambrose escaped with only a leather portfolio of negatives, suggesting he valued this evidence above all his possessions. The ringmaster remains the most enigmatic figure in this growing mystery. Census records identify him as Elias Grint, aged 47 in 1895, a British immigrant with no documented history before his arrival in America in 1881. Curiously, I found his name mentioned in shipping manifests as cargo supervisor for 3 separate vessels that transported exotic animals from various ports. All 3 ships reportedly experienced high crew mortality during their voyages. While searching through digitized police archives from the period, I uncovered a detective's unofficial notes regarding the magnificent marvels. The investigator, one Sergeant Michael Collins, had been tasked with looking into public disturbances following their performances in Cleveland. His handwritten account describes interviewing a stagehand who fled the company after 2 months of employment. Subject claims Ringmaster Grint conducted private ceremonies with the mirror after hours. Describes ritual-like gatherings where performers would stand before the glass, while Grint recited what subject termed words that hurt the ear. Subject reports performers emerging from these sessions appearing emptied out. Likely intoxication or opium use among circus folk, though subject insists he remained sober. The mirror's current whereabouts remained elusive until I received correspondence from an antique collector in Vermont. She claimed to have purchased an ornate full-length mirror matching our description at an estate auction in 1963. According to her letter, she kept it covered after her housemaid quit abruptly, claiming, "It shows me dead." The collector eventually donated it to a small museum specializing in circus memorabilia, where it remained in storage until the facility closed in 2007. Most significantly, I've located what appears to be a second photograph from the same session. This damaged print, found tucked between pages of an auction catalog, shows the same arrangement of performers, but was captured moments later. In this image, the ringmaster has turned to face the mirror rather than the camera. While the performers maintain their staged smiles, their reflections have changed again, now mimicking the expressions of wooden puppets, blank and lifeless except for their eyes, which contain unmistakable terror. Medical records from Pennsylvania Hospital provide another disturbing connection. 3 patients admitted in November 1895 described identical symptoms after attending the circus. Severe insomnia, followed by claims their reflections had become autonomous. All three were diagnosed with collective hysteria and committed to long-term care. Their examining physician noted each patient displayed unusual retinal abnormalities, as if the eyes had absorbed something they were never meant to witness. My investigation takes me next to the Pennsylvania town where the magnificent marvels gave their final performance. Local history suggests the entire troupe was last seen boarding a train that, according to railway records, never reached its next scheduled destination. The track itself was abandoned after a bridge collapse that winter. The wreckage never fully recovered from the deep ravine below. The ravine beneath the collapsed bridge has become my current focus. Local authorities deemed it impractical to recover the wreckage, an unusual decision for the time period when railway investigations were typically thorough. Records indicate the area was hastily cordoned off and subsequently avoided. Notably, the new track constructed in 1897 detours nearly 3 miles around this site, despite the obvious economic disadvantage. I hired a local guide familiar with the terrain to lead me to the ravine. Though hesitant at first, the promise of additional compensation convinced him, though he refused to descend into the gorge itself, citing persistent local superstitions about the area being wrong in the air. Standing at the edge, I understood his reluctance. Despite the century-plus of forest reclamation, something about the atmosphere felt oppressive, as if the very air refused to circulate properly. Using climbing equipment, I descended alone. The wreckage remains partially visible, twisted metal frames emerging from the earth like skeletal fingers. Most unsettling was my discovery of a curved, ornate frame partially buried in sediment, its dimensions matching the mirror from the photographs. Though the reflective surface was long gone, the elaborate carvings on the frame's edge remained distinct, figures contorted in expressions of agony, reminiscent of the reflected faces in Ambrose's photograph. More disturbing still was the underground chamber I discovered beneath a section of collapsed earth. Man-made and roughly circular, the space contained the remnants of what appeared to be a ritual site. 5 stone pedestals arranged in a pentagonal pattern surrounded a central platform where deep grooves had been cut into the stone, all leading to a central drain-like depression. Carbon dating of organic material found within the grooves dates to approximately 1895, but the chamber itself appears far older than the railway or circus. Local indigenous histories make no mention of such structures, suggesting either remarkable secrecy or non-native origins. Among the artifacts recovered was a small leather-bound journal belonging to Elias Grint. Though water damage has rendered many pages illegible, several passages remain clear enough to transcribe. Most notable is an entry dated October 20th, 1895. The glass grows hungry. 23 was ambitious. Too many vessels to maintain without fracture. The reflections leak through when they sleep now. 4 more lost their distinction last night. Must accelerate the convergence before the barrier thins further. The ancient ones grow impatient after centuries of waiting. They promise transcendence in exchange for passage. The bridge location is ideal, deeper there than anywhere in the hemisphere. When the final performance concludes, we shall descend. Intriguingly, geological surveys from 2018 identify this ravine as sitting atop an unexplained magnetic anomaly that disrupts sensitive equipment. Locals report electronics failing and compasses spinning when brought within half a mile of the site. Most concerningly, when developing photographs taken within the chamber, I discovered something absent to my naked eye. Faint, translucent figures standing behind me in every frame, their faces exact matches to the circus performers' mirror reflections from 1895. I've awoken in my hotel room with no memory of leaving the ravine. My climbing equipment and camera are neatly arranged on the desk, though I have no recollection of retrieving them from the gorge. 3 days have apparently passed, according to both the hotel's check-in records and numerous missed calls on my phone. Most disturbingly, I've discovered a series of photographs in my camera that I have no memory of taking. These images show me standing within various locations around town, the library, cemetery, and train station, all while appearing to conduct normal research activities. Yet I have no recollection of visiting these places. When examining these photos more closely, I noticed something profoundly unsettling. In each image, my reflection in nearby windows or polished surfaces doesn't match my actual position. While I stand examining documents in one, my reflection appears to be writing frantically. In another, I smile at a helpful archivist while my reflection's mouth is frozen in what can only be described as a silent scream. The local historical society archivist remembers our conversation vividly. She claims I inquired specifically about doorways constructed before the founding and requested materials related to the original settlement's exile. When I expressed confusion about these topics, she showed me my own signature in their research register, dated yesterday. More troubling still is what I discovered in my notebook. Pages of writing in my own hand that I don't remember documenting. The entries describe a congregation beneath that has been using mirrors as temporary anchors until permanent vessels can be prepared. One passage particularly disturbs me. The 23 were not victims but acolytes, willingly fractured to serve as bridges between. Their reflections were not their suffering, but their true selves emerging. Grint merely accelerated what they had already begun. I've found a locked metal box among my possessions with an unfamiliar key. Inside was a shard of reflective material, evidently broken from a larger piece. When viewed directly, it appears to be ordinary mirror glass, but photographs of the fragment reveal impossible geometries within its depths. Local medical facilities report 23 patients admitted within the past 72 hours, all exhibiting identical symptoms. Dissociative episodes where they claim their reflections have become autonomous. Hospital staff initially suggested mass hysteria until brain scans revealed unprecedented patterns of activity in regions associated with facial recognition. The town itself feels different now. Residents avoid eye contact. Shop owners have begun covering or removing mirrors. I've overheard whispered conversations about returning performers and the second showing. Most concerning is my growing uncertainty about my own actions. Hotel staff report seeing me exit at precisely 3:33 each morning, returning before dawn. The night manager mentioned I've been asking other guests if they'd like to see the truth beneath their faces. I've sealed the mirror fragment in concrete and mailed it to a secure facility. This journal will be similarly dispatched to ensure some record survives. My investigation continues, though I'm increasingly uncertain which side of the mirror I'm truly standing on. If you're reading this, understand that reflections are not echoes. They are windows, and windows work in both directions. What waits behind the glass has been patient for a very long time. The mirror fragment I so carefully sealed away has returned. This morning I found it resting atop my research notes, the concrete casing nowhere to be found. More disturbing still, I no longer remember sending it. My journal indicates I did, yet the postal receipt shows an address that doesn't exist. I've begun marking my skin with small dots of ink each night, a private system to track time passage. This morning revealed 5 new marks I hadn't made, suggesting substantial periods of missing time. The hotel maid refuses to enter my room, claiming she saw me standing motionless in the bathroom while simultaneously sleeping in bed. Yesterday, I ventured to the town cemetery seeking the graves of any Magnificent Marvels performers. The groundskeeper directed me to a peculiar communal plot in the northernmost corner. 23 unmarked stones arranged in the same 3-row formation as the performers in Ambrose's photograph. According to cemetery records, these graves were purchased and prepared in early September 1895, weeks before the troupe's disappearance. More puzzling was the groundskeeper's casual mention that I had already documented these graves extensively 2 days prior, taking hundreds of measurements and making rubbings of invisible markings he couldn't perceive. He returned a notebook allegedly containing my findings, filled with pages of elaborate diagrams, geometrical configurations that make my eyes water when I attempt to follow their patterns. The local librarian similarly claims previous interactions, saying I've spent hours reviewing materials about the convergence beneath and requested access to sealed town council minutes from 1895. These records, when I examine them today, contain troubling entries regarding an emergency session held October 30th of that year. The council voted unanimously to seal all knowledge of the events beneath the ravine and allocated substantial funds to ensure the slumber remains undisturbed. Most alarmingly, I discovered a present-day connection. Current town council members are all descendants of those who attended that emergency session, and every single one has refused to install mirrors in their homes, according to the chatty hardware store owner who finds this multi-generational quirk just one of those local traditions. I've begun watching my own reflection more carefully. This morning, I noticed a 3-second delay before it mimicked my movement to touch my face. When I deliberately knocked a glass off the bedside table, my reflection continued staring directly at me as the real glass shattered. The mirror fragment now seems to change size depending on who observes it. When I measure it, the dimensions remain constant, yet visitors perceive it differently. The hotel manager saw just a sliver, while the maintenance man refused to enter after glimpsing what he described as a whole damn wall of that thing. Phone calls to colleagues have proven useless. They report I've been in regular contact, sending research updates and requesting obscure texts on sympathetic resonance between divided consciousness. I have no memory of these interactions. Tomorrow I return to the ravine. The whispering that emerges from the mirror fragment grows more insistent each night, and I've begun to understand fragments of its language. They're not attempting to cross over entirely, merely to thin the boundary. The 23 were never their vessels, but rather the doorway itself, fragmented across multiple reflections. I fear I may be becoming part of that door. I've begun cataloging the positions of reflective surfaces in town, windows, polished metal, standing water, and have discovered they form precise geometric patterns matching the diagrams in my mysteriously filled notebook. When plotted on a map, they create a scaled replica of the chamber beneath the ravine. Perhaps more disturbing, these reflective points seem to have been deliberately established or maintained for generations. Today I spoke with Emma Whitfield, 93 years old and the town's oldest resident. Her grandmother worked as a seamstress for the Magnificent Marvels. According to family lore, the performers underwent a transformation ritual upon joining the troupe. Each member would spend 7 nights sleeping before the mirror, after which Grint would conduct a ceremony he called the division, supposedly separating what he termed the earthly anchor from the ascending form. Emma showed me a small hand mirror passed down through her family, its back inscribed with unfamiliar symbols. Grandmother called it a watcher's glass, she explained. Said it was the only safe way to observe them, seeing them through reflection of reflection. When I peered into it while standing before my hotel room mirror, I glimpsed not myself but the ravine, yet from an impossible aerial perspective, as though looking down from great height. The town library's restricted archives yielded fragments of Grint's personal philosophy, outlined in letters to potential financial backers. He described mirrors as imperfect barriers between layers of existence and claimed to have discovered techniques to thin the restraints between what is and what waits. Most tellingly, he wrote, the 23 are not merely performers but resonant points, each vibrating to a specific frequency. When properly arranged and divided, they form a harmony that weakens the boundary. I've begun experiencing auditory hallucinations. Or perhaps they're not hallucinations at all. Near any reflective surface, I hear faint circus music interwoven with what sounds like backwards speech. Recording this phenomenon and reversing the playback revealed coherent phrases. The division nears completion, and vessels await the final reflection. Most concerning are the changes to Ambrose's original photograph. Though physically unchanged, what appears within the frame shifts subtly each time I examine it. The performers remain in their positions, but their reflections now seem to be reaching toward the glass, palms pressed against an invisible barrier. The ringmaster's reflection has vanished entirely, leaving a void in the mirror's surface. The current town council has noticed my investigations. This morning I found an envelope containing a train ticket departing today and a note reading simply, "Some doors, once opened, cannot be sealed again. We've maintained the boundaries for generations. Leave now or join the 23. But I cannot leave. My reflection no longer follows me out of frame when I walk away from mirrors. It remains watching until I return. Strange marks have appeared on my skin, precise geometric patterns matching those in the underground chamber. I don't recall making them, yet they seem freshly carved. I've come to suspect the photograph itself was never evidence of supernatural phenomena, but rather the actual mechanism of it, a visual anchor connecting viewers across generations to what waits behind the glass. By studying it, I've been reconfiguring myself into the 24th position of their formation. Tonight, I return to the ravine with Ambrose's photograph, not to investigate, but to complete the pattern. They've been waiting patiently for the final reflection. I have returned from the ravine, but I am not alone. The descent was familiar this time, my body remembering a path my mind does not recall taking. The chamber welcomed me like an old friend, its stone pedestals humming with subtle vibration. I placed Ambrose's photograph at the center of the configuration, watching as condensation formed on its surface despite the dry air. What happened next exists in fragments within my consciousness. The photograph began to leak. Not water, but a viscous substance that reflected light in impossible ways. The fluid formed precise channels along the grooves in the stone floor, filling the pattern I now recognize as identical to the markings on my skin. A figure emerged from the shadows. Theodore Ambrose himself, impossibly preserved, his photographer's vest still stained with chemical fixatives. "You've brought the final anchoring point," he said, voice hollow as if speaking through water. "We've waited 128 years for the formation to complete." Ambrose explained what I had begun to suspect. The photograph was never documentation, it was a ritual in itself. The camera didn't capture the moment the performer's reflections revealed their true nature. It created the division between their forms and reflections. Each print of the image served as a tether, a door left minutely ajar. Grint discovered that consciousness could be divided, Ambrose continued, circling the photograph pooling with reflective fluid. One half remaining in flesh, one half freed beyond the glass. But the separation was imperfect, unstable. He needed a 24th point to complete the geometric harmony, a witness from another time who would willingly join the configuration. I wanted to flee, but my reflection in the spreading pool of liquid glass moved independently, reaching upward as if to pull itself free. I realized with horror that I had been preparing myself as the final component since first viewing the photograph. The most terrifying revelation came when Ambrose smiled, revealing mirror-smooth teeth. "I was never the photographer," he said. "I am what came through first, wearing Ambrose like a costume. The real Theodore has been trapped in reflections since 1895, documenting everything from behind the glass." The fluid from the photograph began climbing my legs, cool and heavy, reshaping itself around my form. In the liquid surface, I saw not my reflection but what appeared to be a vast audience seated in tiered rows, watching with anticipation. Beyond them stretched a landscape of impossible architecture, spiraling towers and bridges connecting empty spaces. As the reflective substance reached my chest, I understood the true nature of the magnificent marvels. They were never the victims of some eldritch horror. They were willing participants in becoming the boundary between worlds, each performer maintaining a position in the pattern that kept something vast from fully emerging. I have returned to my hotel room now, though I don't recall the journey back. The photograph is gone, but I no longer need it. Every reflective surface shows me the same audience, waiting. My skin has become a perfect boundary. Human flesh on one side, something mirror-smooth and cold on the other. The circus is preparing for its grand return, and I have become the final performer in a show 128 years in the making. I've lost track of time since my last coherent entry. The hotel room has become both sanctuary and prison, its walls now covered with reflective materials, aluminum foil, broken compact mirrors, even shards of glass carefully arranged in patterns I don't remember creating. My field journal has transformed into something unrecognizable, pages filled with calculations and diagrams that seem to plot intersections between our world and somewhere else. Sleep brings no respite. In dreams, I perform under a vast canopy of stars that move in deliberate patterns, my body executing elaborate routines I've never learned. 23 shadowed figures surround me, their movements synchronized with mine, creating geometric formations that shift and pulse like living mathematics. I wake gasping, muscles aching as if I've been physically exerting myself for hours. The townspeople have begun to change. Yesterday, I witnessed the hardware store owner standing motionless before his shop window for 45 minutes, lips moving in silent conversation with his reflection. The waitress at the local diner served my coffee without looking at me, a perfect mirror image of my own order sitting untouched across the empty booth. When I pointed this out, she simply whispered, The 24th position balances the equation. Symmetry will be restored. Most disturbing is what happened when I attempted to leave town. The bus departed on schedule, yet after 3 hours of travel, we arrived back at the same station. None of the other passengers seemed troubled by this impossible loop. When I frantically asked the driver what was happening, he adjusted his mirror to look at me and simply said, "Some performances have no final curtain. You bought a round-trip ticket the moment you examined the photograph. I've tried destroying reflective surfaces, but they appear to regenerate overnight. A bathroom mirror shattered into 23 precise fragments now hangs reassembled in my closet, though I have no memory of repairing it. The reflection in my phone screen no longer matches my surroundings. Instead, it shows an ornate circus wagon traveling through an alien landscape where the physics of light and shadow operate under unfamiliar principles. Messages arrive from unknown numbers with coordinates that, when mapped, create the same pentagonal pattern as the ravine chamber. Local children have begun playing a new game in the streets, forming circles and chanting what sounds like nonsense until recorded and played backward. The 24th completes the mirror line. The cage becomes a door when worlds align. Most alarming of all, I've begun to notice subtle changes in my physical form. My movements have become fluid, graceful, possessed of a performer's precision I've never had. In certain lighting, my shadow doesn't match my posture, but instead strikes theatrical poses as if responding to phantom applause. I understand now that my investigation was never my own initiative. I was summoned, carefully selected as the final variable in an equation started in 1895. The circus never disappeared. It merely began an intermission that lasted 128 years. And I, unwitting understudy, have been rehearsing for my role all along. The grand reopening approaches. I can feel it in the air's electric charge, in the way clocks throughout town have synchronized to count down to something magnificent and terrible. The show must go on. I've discovered something in the town registry that changes everything about the magnificent marvels. The circus didn't simply appear in 1895. They had been coming to this region every 23 years since colonial times, always under different names. Church records from 1726 mention traveling wonderment performers who left behind a strange melancholy after their departure. Town council minutes from 1749 describe an assemblage of peculiar entertainers whose visit coincided with a rash of missing reflections in homes. By 1818, newspaper accounts speak of the Illuminated Wonders, a troupe whose performances allegedly caused temporal disorientation among audience members. The pattern is undeniable. Every 23 years they return. The name changes, the faces change, but something essential remains constant. The mirror, the formation, the aftermath. More disturbing is what I found buried in county property records. The ravine where the train allegedly crashed was owned by Elias Grint's family since 1719. 6 generations of Grints have maintained ownership of this seemingly worthless plot of land, transferring it through carefully structured legal instruments that ensure it remains untaxed and undeveloped. The town itself appears to have formed around this location rather than vice versa. Geological surveys indicate the ravine isn't natural but was deliberately excavated, though no records exist of such massive earthworks. Local indigenous oral histories speak of the area as the place where shadows stand alone, forbidden to their people long before European settlement. I've begun noticing something when examining my own reflection. A slight asynchronicity, as if my mirror self completes movements microseconds before I initiate them. Last night I conducted an experiment with a high-speed camera. The footage, when slowed down, clearly shows my reflection beginning to smile 3 frames before my actual face changes expression. The hotel manager slipped a note under my door this morning. "Your reservation expires tomorrow. 23 days is all anyone gets." I've been here exactly 22 days, though my records indicate only 12. Most unnerving was my discovery in the town's small medical clinic. Their records show 23 patients currently admitted, all displaying identical symptoms of reflected consciousness disorder, a diagnosis I've found in no medical literature. When I visited, the ward appeared empty, yet staff moved about as if tending to full beds. In one room, I observed a nurse apparently taking the pulse of empty air while speaking soothingly to no one. The circus is reforming around me. Each morning I notice more townspeople exhibiting performer-like qualities, the barista executing perfect juggling motions while preparing coffee, the pharmacist walking with the distinctive gait of a tightrope walker. They're rehearsing, though none will acknowledge it when questioned. Tomorrow marks the 128th anniversary of the original photograph's creation. 23 multiplied by 23 years. The mathematical precision cannot be coincidence. The countdown I've been feeling approaches its end, and I find myself strangely eager for the final curtain to rise. The mirror fragment grows warmer in my hand as the anniversary approaches. I've spent the night poring over meteorological records from 1895 forward, discovering another pattern hidden in plain sight. Every 23rd year following the magnificent marvel's disappearance, this region experiences unexplained atmospheric phenomena. Aurora-like lights despite the southerly latitude, sudden temperature inversions, and electromagnetic disturbances affecting early telegraph systems and later radio equipment. Most revealing was a pamphlet published by a local astronomical society in 1941 documenting spectral anomalies, visible only when viewed through polished reflective surfaces. Their crude spectroscopic analysis suggested these lights operated on wavelengths slightly offset from our visible spectrum, essentially broadcasting on frequencies human eyes couldn't naturally perceive. The town archives yielded another crucial document, a letter from Theodore Ambrose to his sister, dated 3 days after taking the circus photograph. His normally precise handwriting grows increasingly erratic as the letter progresses. I fear I've become both photographer and subject. When developing the plates, I noticed my own reflection in the chemical bath, but it was observing me from an angle impossible for any reflection to achieve. I've begun avoiding mirrors, yet still glimpse myself watching from reflective surfaces where I cannot possibly be. Most disturbing, Elizabeth, I appear to be smiling in these reflections, regardless of my actual expression. This morning I visited the town's oldest church, where baptismal records dating to 1726 are still preserved. The leather-bound registry contains an alarming entry: 23 infants baptized on the same autumn day, all from different families but bearing an identical birthmark described as a perfect circle upon the left palm. The circuit is completing itself, not just through time but through generations of this community. The hotel telephone rang at 3:33 this morning. When I answered, I heard only circus music playing backward, punctuated by what sounded like glass breaking. The call originated from my own room number, according to the switchboard operator, who seemed unsurprised by this impossibility. I've made one final discovery that may offer some hope of interrupting the pattern. A small notation in Grint's journal suggests the ritual requires absolute precision. The 24th must enter willingly, with full awareness of division. Perhaps by understanding the mechanism completely, I can subvert it from within. The townspeople are gathering in the square outside my window, arranging themselves in the now familiar formation of 3 rows. Many carry small mirrors that catch the morning light, sending precise patterns of reflection across the pavement. They're not victims or accomplices, but components in a vast machine that has been operating across centuries. As I write these final lines, my own reflection has completely stopped mimicking my movements. It stands perfectly still, watching me with anticipation as I continue to write. In the mirror behind it, I can see what appears to be an audience taking their seats, program booklets open on their laps. The show is about to begin, and I now understand my role is not as participant but saboteur. The 24th position creates not stability, but an opportunity for disruption that comes only once every 128 years. The phenomenon of temporal resonance explains much about what I've witnessed in this town. According to papers I discovered hidden behind a loose brick in the church basement, Grint wasn't merely a ringmaster but a researcher of what he called sympathetic consciousness folding. These yellowed documents detail his theory that human awareness could exist simultaneously in multiple temporal states if properly tuned through precise emotional frequencies. Mirrors, Grint believed, were not merely reflective surfaces, but potential membranes where these frequencies could be manipulated. The circus performers weren't random entertainers, but carefully selected individuals who possessed natural resonant capabilities. The strongman, acrobats, clowns, each embodied a specific emotional archetype that, when arranged in the correct formation, created a harmonic pattern capable of bending the barrier between now and then. The photograph wasn't documentation, but activation. The flash of Ambrose's camera synchronized 23 consciousnesses at once, capturing the exact moment their awareness bifurcated. One version remained in physical form, while another projected forward through the reflective gateway, skipping like a stone across the surface of time, touching down every 23 years. This explains why I've been experiencing time slippages and why the townspeople seem to be rehearsing for something they consciously deny. They aren't preparing for a performance. They are echoes of performances past, rippling forward. The patients in the empty hospital beds exist slightly out of phase with our current temporal position, visible only to those already attuned to the resonance. Most revealing was my discovery of Ambrose's original camera in the Historical Society's basement, mislabeled as mining equipment. The brass plate beneath the lens bears an inscription in Latin that translates roughly to, "What divides also connects when viewed from sufficient distance." When I examined the glass focusing plate through Emma Whitfield's watcher's glass, I saw not my own reflection, but the actual circus performers, still frozen in their poses, eyes now turned expectantly toward me. I now understand why the 24th position remains critical. 23 points create an unstable resonance that propagates forward in time, but requires periodic reinforcement, a consciousness that bridges between intervals to maintain the pattern. Every 128 years, this reinforcement must be replaced, or the entire temporal construct collapses. The town itself serves as a physical anchor for this phenomenon, each generation unconsciously maintaining the precise geometric relationships between reflective surfaces, rebuilding structures in the exact same locations after fires or floods, preserving the pattern without understanding why certain traditions must be maintained. Tomorrow isn't just an anniversary, it's a convergence point where all 23 previous performances exist simultaneously. The gathering in the town square isn't preparation, but culmination, the moment when temporal resonance reaches maximum harmony and the barrier between then and now becomes momentarily permeable in both directions. I've decided what I must do. If I take the 24th position but deliberately introduce dissonance rather than harmony, I might collapse the entire construct. The mirror fragment grows hot against my skin, as if sensing my intention to disrupt rather than complete. The town's transformation accelerated as midnight approached. Reflective surfaces I'd never noticed before revealed themselves. Puddles that refused to evaporate, polished doorknobs catching impossible light. Even the glossy eyes of stray animals that watched my movements with calculated precision. The mathematical certainty of it all suggested not magic but science, a technology so advanced or primal that it appeared supernatural to modern understanding. I've been using Emma Whitfield's watcher's glass to observe the preparations without being detected. Through its doubled reflection, I witnessed the town mayor carefully arranging 23 chairs in the square, each positioned at precise angles to neighboring buildings. When measured, these angles corresponded exactly to the constellation overhead on October 30th, 1895, the night of the Magnificent Marvel's final performance. Most revealing was what I discovered about Theodore Ambrose's photographic process. His camera used a rare silver bromide emulsion of his own formulation, containing trace minerals extracted from the ravine itself. These elements appear nowhere in standard photographic literature of the period. Chemical analysis of a sample I scraped from his camera's interior revealed properties that defy conventional understanding. The substance simultaneously reflects and absorbs light depending on the observer's position. The temporal mechanics at work suggest something beyond mere ghostly manifestation. These performers aren't haunting our present. They're attempting to complete a journey begun 128 years ago. Their consciousness, fragmented between reflection and reality, has been suspended in a state of perpetual transition, neither fully here nor there. I've begun to experience what Grint documented as sympathetic resonance, my thoughts occasionally syncing with another consciousness that feels ancient yet familiar. During these moments, I understand the mechanism completely. The mirror isn't a gateway, but a lens, focusing awareness across temporal boundaries. The 23 performers willingly divided themselves because complete transition required anchors on both sides. Parts of themselves remained behind as tethers while their essential consciousness projected forward. What they never anticipated was that the division would become permanent. their reflections trapped in an endless loop while their physical forms continued aging, performing, traveling from town to town with diminishing awareness of why they felt increasingly hollow. The townspeople aren't conspirators, but descendants of the original audience, genetically predisposed to resonance through generations of exposure. They're drawn to complete the pattern not through conscious choice, but through inherited memory encoded in their very cells. I've been testing the limitations of the phenomenon. When I deliberately introduce asymmetry, placing reflective surfaces at incorrect angles or disrupting established sight lines, the resonance falters. Watches run at normal speeds, shadows behave according to conventional physics, and for brief moments, the townspeople appear confused, as if waking from sleepwalking. Tonight, as the temporal convergence reaches its peak, I plan to introduce catastrophic disruption at the precise moment when the 24th position is to be filled. Instead of completing their eternal performance, I intend to shatter the pattern entirely, releasing both the performers and this town from a cycle that has consumed generations. Whether this will heal or destroy what waits on both sides of the glass remains to be seen. The town square clock struck midnight, its chimes resonating with unnatural clarity across the gathered crowd. I stood at its edge, the mirror fragment now almost too hot to hold. Through Emma's watcher's glass, I could see what remained invisible to ordinary perception, shimmering threads of light connecting each townsperson to the carefully positioned chairs, creating a complex geometric web above our heads. Most extraordinary was the visual doubling that occurred as the final chime faded. Behind each resident stood a faint, translucent figure in circus attire, the projected echoes of the original performers overlapping with their temporal anchors. The strongman's ghost towered behind the hardware store owner, the female acrobat's form gracefully posed behind a school teacher. Each pairing perfectly matched the positions in Ambrose's photograph, completing a circuit that had been pulsing across decades. The mayor stepped forward, his movements mechanical yet fluid, like a marionette guided by expert hands. "The circle welcomes its completion," he announced, voice overlapping with another deeper tone that seemed to emanate from somewhere beneath us. The 24th position awaits its occupant. The division prepares for reunification. On cue, the townsfolk turned toward me in perfect unison, their expressions blank yet expectant. The empty chair at the formation's center began to glow with a faint internal light, its wooden surface taking on a reflective quality like liquid glass. I approached slowly, the disruptive elements I'd prepared concealed within my clothing, asymmetrical mirrors, reflective surfaces deliberately scratched in patterns that would introduce mathematical dissonance into the formation. My plan depended on timing, allowing the resonance to reach maximum amplitude before introducing destructive interference. "We have waited through 5 cycles for proper alignment," the mayor continued, though his lips no longer synchronized with the words. "Since first we discovered the membrane's thinness at this precise longitude. 23 willing vessels, 1 unwitting catalyst. The equation balances tonight." As I drew closer to the central chair, the air grew thick and resistant, as if I were wading through invisible currents. Through Emma's glass, I could see what truly surrounded me. Not a town square, but the underground chamber beneath the ravine, its stone pedestals now occupied by ghostly performers whose forms flickered between flesh and reflection. Most disturbing was what loomed beyond them, vast shapes moving in a darkness that somehow existed simultaneously beneath our feet and in some impossible elsewhere. These entities possessed geometries that hurt my mind to perceive, their dimensions folding in ways that suggested consciousness without form, awareness without boundary. "You misunderstand our purpose," whispered a voice directly behind me. Elias grinned himself, his form the most substantial of all the spectral figures. "We never sought escape from your reality to ours. We are not the performance. We are the audience." What watches from beyond the glass required a perfect formation to focus its perception into your world. With horrifying clarity, I finally understood. The 24th position wasn't meant to complete a doorway out, but to stabilize a window through which something else could observe us completely. A lens focusing attention from somewhere infinitely larger than our reality. The true performance was about to begin, and humanity was unwittingly center stage. I lunged for the central chair, but instead of taking my assigned position, I shattered Emma's watcher's glass against its surface. The crystalline fragments exploded outward with impossible force, each shard catching and refracting the unnatural light in discordant patterns. The harmonious geometry that had been building for generations instantly collapsed into chaos. The townsfolk screamed in unified anguish, their voices blending with those of the spectral performers. The mayor fell to his knees, his form flickering between his mundane appearance and that of Elias Grint, the boundary between them disintegrating. "What have you done?" he roared, voice reverberating at multiple pitches simultaneously. "The audience has waited centuries for this performance." The air rippled with visible distortions as the delicate temporal architecture began collapsing. Through the fragmenting reality around me, I caught glimpses of what truly surrounded us. Not just the 23 performers and their unwitting descendants, but row upon row of impossible observers extending beyond perception. Their attention, focused through the lens the magnificent marvels had created, now scattered as the lens itself fractured. The mirror fragment in my pocket burned white-hot, forcing me to extract it. In its surface I saw not my reflection, but countless eyes blinking in confusion and mounting rage. The ground beneath the town square began to crack, revealing not soil but the ancient chamber's stone floor. "The resonance can still be salvaged," Grint's voice echoed from multiple directions. "The pattern is self-healing if given anchor." The townspeople began moving with renewed purpose, their bodies contorting into unnatural positions as they attempted to physically compensate for the disrupted geometry. Their reflections in nearby windows and puddles moved independently, reaching through the glass with impossible limbs. I frantically completed my plan, removing the asymmetrical mirrors I'd prepared and positioning them at careful intervals around the square. Each placement caused visible ripples in the air, like stones dropped into a still pond, the waves interfering with one another in calculated dissonance. The Mayor Grint lurched toward me, his form stretching and compressing as the temporal resonance fluctuated wildly. "They will find another focal point, another town. This delays nothing." "Perhaps," I replied, placing the final mirror. "But your perfect formation is broken forever." As if responding to my words, the spectral figures of the original performers began to separate from their descendants, their forms gaining solidity as the townsfolk collapsed like puppets with cut strings. One by one, the magnificent marvels manifested fully, no longer trapped between reflection and reality, but present in their entirety for the first time in over a century. The acrobat stepped forward, her eyes clearing of the vacant expression they'd held in every photograph. "The division ends," she said, her voice her own again. "We never understood what we were building." As dawn broke over the horizon, the world seemed to exhale. The endless audience beyond our reality reluctantly withdrew its attention, the performance indefinitely postponed. The 23 performers stood in silent gratitude as their physical forms began slowly fading with the morning light, released at last from their role as living reflections. The townspeople emerged from their trance-like states gradually, like patients awakening from long anesthesia. Their confusion was palpable as they gathered in small groups, piecing together fragmented memories of what they'd been doing, not just during the previous night, but across generations of their families. I remained in the square as the sun climbed higher, documenting everything in my journal. The mirrors I'd placed maintained their positions, though their reflective surfaces had turned cloudy and opaque. When touched, they crumbled to fine dust that dispersed in the morning breeze. Emma Whitfield arrived as the cleanup began, leaning heavily on her walking cane. "They're truly gone," she murmured, surveying the scene. "My grandmother told me this day might come, though she never believed it would happen in her lifetime." "Your watcher's glass was the key," I explained. "It showed the truth from both sides simultaneously." She nodded slowly. "Family legend says it was created by a glassmaker who witnessed the original 1895 performance, but refused to become part of the pattern. He discovered that reflections of reflections cancel each other out, like how two mirrors facing each other create infinite regression that eventually fades to darkness." The mayor approached us, his movements now entirely his own. The overlapping presence of Grint had vanished completely. "The town council will meet this afternoon. he said, voice hoarse. "We have records to address, histories to reconsider." He paused, struggling with concepts that had been foundational to his community's identity. "What happens now?" "The performance has ended," I said, "but I suspect the audience may seek another stage." Over the next days, I documented the physical changes to the town. The cemetery's 23 unmarked graves had collapsed inward, leaving perfect circular depressions in the earth. The ravine's underground chamber was found completely filled with solid bedrock when geological surveys were conducted, as if it had never existed. Most tellingly, every mirror and reflective surface in town had reverted to ordinary glass, reflecting exactly what stood before them, nothing more. Before departing, I visited the town records office once more. The archivists were busily reorganizing documentation that had apparently altered itself overnight. Where once there had been careful misdirection and deliberate omissions, now sat straightforward accounts of local history, though utterly devoid of any mention of the magnificent marvels or unusual phenomena. "It's as if something is erasing its own footprints," the head archivist remarked. On my final evening, I noticed something troubling while packing my belongings. The original Ambrose photograph, which I'd kept secured in my research materials, had changed. The performers remained in their positions, the mirror still stood behind them, but now their reflections perfectly matched their actual expressions. The uncanny dissonance that had first drawn my attention had vanished completely. As I prepared to board the train the following morning, Emma pressed a small package into my hands. "My grandmother's diaries," she explained. "They document similar phenomena in towns across the country. Different circumstances, different formations, but always reflections, always watching." The train pulled away from the station, the town receding into the distance. Through the window's reflection, I could have sworn I glimpsed circus tents being erected in another community beyond the horizon. The photographs of the magnificent marvels have begun appearing in unexpected places. Reports from neighboring states describe sudden discoveries of identical images in attics, library archives, and antique shops. Always the same 23 performers with their telling reflections, though previously undocumented copies. More troubling still, these photographs show subtle variations. Different positioning of hands, slight changes in the backdrop, yet always featuring the critical mirror. This proliferation suggests what I feared most. The disruption I caused was merely localized. The phenomenon hasn't ended but dispersed, seeking new focal points across a wider geographic area rather than concentrating its energy in one precisely calibrated location. Emma Whitfield's grandmother's diaries have proven illuminating in ways I hadn't anticipated. The final volume contains correspondence with other watchers, as they called themselves, individuals in different communities who had recognized and resisted similar manifestations. Their letters describe parallel but distinct methods. A mining town in Colorado where the pattern formed through precisely arranged mineshaft entrances. A coastal village in Maine where tide pools at specific intervals created reflective surfaces at exact lunar phases. A desert community where polished rock formations aligned only during particular solstices. Each watcher documented the same underlying mechanism working through different cultural expressions. Always 23 primary components, always requiring a 24th to complete the observation circuit. Most revealing was a letter dated 1943 from a physicist working on early nuclear research. He described discoveries about quantum observation collapsing probability states and expressed horror at realizing that human consciousness might serve as both measuring device and gateway for something that existed perpendicular to conventional reality. "We believed ourselves the observers of universal phenomena," he wrote, "only to discover we may be the observed, our reality merely a stage for attention that emanates from somewhere fundamentally elsewhere." I've begun correlating reported anomalies nationwide following my disruption of the pattern. Weather services document unprecedented aurora borealis sightings across improbable latitudes. Observatories report momentary gravitational lensing effects with no apparent astronomical cause. Most telling are scattered accounts of individuals experiencing simultaneous consciousness, existing in two locations before the episodes resolve, leaving them with dual memories that gradually merge into single timelines. These symptoms suggest the audience hasn't departed, but merely adjusted its viewing angle, distributing its attention across multiple smaller apertures rather than through one perfect lens. The circus aesthetic itself appears to be evolving in these secondary manifestations. Reports describe witnesses glimpsing not 19th century performers but modern entertainers, gamers live streaming to invisible audiences, reality television participants, social media personalities, all exhibiting the same disconnection between their presented selves and what appears in reflections. The fundamental mathematics remains unchanged. 23 points of focused observation requiring a 24th to stabilize, but the cultural framework adapts to contemporary forms of performance and attention. I'm left wondering if modern technology hasn't simply provided more efficient surfaces for whatever waits beyond the glass. Our screens, cameras, and devices create billions of reflective interfaces daily, each potentially serving as a miniature window. Perhaps the original circus formation is obsolete not because it failed, but because something infinitely more pervasive has replaced it. I returned to the hotel to find my laptop screen displaying footage I never recorded. A perfect aerial view of the town square from last night, though I had no drone or elevated recording equipment. The digital timestamp showed it was capturing in real time, despite the device being unplugged. Most disturbing was what the footage revealed. Townspeople going about their day with seemingly normal interactions, but their digital reflections in store windows and car surfaces were performing synchronized movements from the magnificent marvel's routines. The mayor's reflection juggled invisible objects while he shook hands with constituents. A child's reflection walked an imaginary tightrope as she skipped down the sidewalk. Technology itself has become the new mirror. I called Emma Whitfield, who arrived clutching a weathered journal I hadn't seen before. My grandmother's colleague documented something similar during the early days of television, she explained. Test patterns broadcast at night contained geometric configurations identical to the ravine chamber's floor markings. The implications are staggering. The disruption didn't end the performance, it evolved it. By shattering the concentrated focal point, I inadvertently scattered the signal across countless digital surfaces, each becoming a miniature portal. The 23 performers haven't disappeared. They've been digitized, their consciousness fragmented across our interconnected devices. Emma's grandmother's colleague had theorized this possibility. His final journal entry reads, "Should the primary configuration ever collapse, the pattern would seek efficiency through emerging technologies. The audience's attention, once focused through a single perfect lens, would redistribute across many imperfect ones, potentially reaching more observers through degraded but numerous apertures." This explains the proliferating photographs. Each copy serves as a seed crystal, establishing new growth points for the pattern to regenerate. The subtle variations represent calibration attempts, the pattern seeking optimal configuration for contemporary viewing. Most concerning is what I discovered when examining the hotel's security footage. The cameras captured me returning to my room at midnight, though I was demonstrably in the town square at that time. This digital doppelganger moved with fluid precision, occasionally executing subtle movements recognizable from circus performances. The 24th position hasn't been eliminated. It's been duplicated across digital reflections of everyone who viewed the original photograph, including myself. We've all become partial anchors, unwittingly stabilizing distributed observation points through our screens, cameras, and devices. I'm writing this final entry with pen and paper, as my laptop now displays only mirror images of whatever I type, the text appearing reversed regardless of settings adjustments. My phone's camera shows 23 translucent figures standing behind me whenever I open it, their positions shifting to maintain perfect geometric alignment regardless of my movement. The circus never needed a physical big top. We've constructed something far more efficient, a global network of perfectly reflective surfaces, billions of digital windows through which something patient and vast can finally watch the performance it's waited centuries to attend. And the show, it seems, is just beginning. I've searched for days across digital networks, tracking the proliferating patterns of the magnificent marvel's dispersed consciousness. Each viral image sharing subtle circus motifs, each trending video accidentally forming fragments of their formation, all of it spreading with the precision of a carefully orchestrated performance. This morning something changed. My scattered notes suddenly arranged themselves into perfect geometric alignment on my desk without my touching them. The diagrams from the ravine chamber now manifested in the random distribution of my research materials. The pattern was completing itself even in the physical world. Emma Whitfield called in a panic. "They're converging again," she whispered. "Every screen in town shows the same feed, 23 performers taking their positions. But something's different this time." I rushed to the town square to find residents gathered before their phones and tablets, all displaying identical live streams of the original circus troupe. Yet the performers weren't mimicking their previous formations. They stood in a circle facing outward, their expressions solemn rather than performative. The strongman's deep voice emerged simultaneously from every speaker. The audience grows impatient with scattered observation. A focused lens must be restored. That's when I noticed what had changed in the town itself. The buildings surrounding the square had shifted overnight, their architectural relationships subtly altered to form the same pentagonal pattern as the ravine chamber. The townspeople stood in precise positions, unconsciously recreating the formation I had disrupted. "They're attempting to rebuild the lens," Emma explained, arriving breathless beside me. "But not for something to watch us, for us to watch them." Understanding struck like lightning. We had misinterpreted everything from the beginning. The circus performers weren't creating a window for something to observe our reality. They were trying to show us what exists beyond our limited perception. The 24th position wasn't meant to complete their captivity, but to witness their liberation. Emma pressed her grandmother's watcher's glass into my hand. "Look again," she urged. Through the doubled reflection, I finally saw the truth. The vast audience I had glimpsed wasn't monstrous at all. It was humanity's potential consciousness expanded beyond our current limitations. The magnificent marvels hadn't been trapped. They'd been elevated, experiencing multiple realities simultaneously, while trying to show us what awaited. As digital and physical reality aligned perfectly, I understood my role at last. The 24th position wasn't victim or saboteur, but witness. The observer needed to collapse infinite possibility into observable reality. I stepped into the center of the formation as screens and reflective surfaces throughout the town unified into a single vast display. Through Emma's glass, I saw what the performers had been trying to reveal for over a century. Not horror, but transcendence, consciousness liberated from singular perception. The photograph that started everything transformed one final time, now showing 24 figures in perfect harmony, their reflections and physical forms unified at last. The performance hadn't been meant to imprison anyone, but to demonstrate what existed beyond the glass. If only we had the courage to truly see. The rain fell in sheets as I boarded the train, leaving behind a town that no longer remembered what it had witnessed. The scattered fragments of the magnificent marvel's consciousness had achieved something unprecedented, not invasion, but integration. Their performance continued, but now we had become willing participants rather than unwitting vessels. Emma Whitfield's final revelation haunts me most. Her grandmother hadn't merely been a watcher, but one of the original 23 performers who chose to remain behind. "Someone had to maintain the memory," Emma explained, "to prepare for when the cycle completed. The photographs spreading across the country aren't seeds of something sinister, but invitations to a greater awareness. Each image creates a point of contact where human consciousness can experience what the performers discovered in 1895, that reality is fundamentally performative, existing only when observed, changing depending on the viewer's perspective." Theodore Ambrose wasn't consumed by something malevolent. His camera hadn't captured evil but breakthrough, the moment when 23 individuals simultaneously perceived existence beyond singular consciousness. Their suffering in the mirror wasn't pain but the shock of expanded awareness, their expressions reflecting the staggering implications of experiencing multiple realities simultaneously. Elias Grint's journals, which Emma finally shared completely, reveal he had discovered ancient mathematical principles suggesting consciousness existed perpendicular to physical reality. The circus formation wasn't meant to summon or contain anything, but to create precise geometric resonance that allowed glimpsing this perpendicular awareness. like turning a two-dimensional drawing to suddenly reveal its third dimension. The ravine was never a prison or gateway, but an acoustic chamber of sorts, its precise dimensions creating perfect conditions for consciousness to vibrate at frequencies that transcended conventional perception. The performers hadn't vanished, but stepped sideways into expanded awareness, attempting to leave breadcrumbs for others to follow. What truly terrifies me isn't what waited behind the glass, but what waits within us, the capacity to perceive beyond our limited senses, to exist in multiple states simultaneously. The horror was never external, but our own resistance to transcending perceptual boundaries, our minds desperately clinging to singular reality when multiplicity awaited. As the train carries me away, I notice my reflection in the window no longer perfectly mimics my movements. It hasn't been possessed by something sinister. It's simply experiencing time differently, seeing moments I haven't yet reached. My consciousness has begun to expand perpendicular to conventional perception. The 23rd configuration was never about completing something external, but about completing ourselves, reconnecting with awareness beyond linear time and singular perspective. The true performance wasn't for some otherworldly audience, but for humanity itself, showing us what we might become if we dared look beyond the reflective surface of conventional reality. The circus continues its eternal tour, not through towns and cities, but through minds ready to perceive it. And I, reluctant 24th observer, have finally understood that I wasn't investigating their disappearance, but participating in their ongoing performance. The rain had ceased by the time I reached the next station, leaving everything with that peculiar sheen that transforms ordinary surfaces into mirrors. I lingered before disembarking, watching passengers hurry past my window. Each moved with unconscious grace, their reflections occasionally executing subtle movements that didn't quite match. A hand gesture completed microseconds before its physical counterpart, smiles forming in reflection first before spreading to actual faces. They didn't know, couldn't see. Yet, they were participating nonetheless. My research has taken new direction in the months since leaving the town. Rather than documenting supernatural occurrences, I've become obsessed with perception itself, how consciousness collapses probability into singular experience, how observation creates rather than merely witnesses reality. The boundary between performer and audience has dissolved completely in my understanding. Emma Whitfield writes weekly, tracking subtle changes in her community. The town has thrived since the configuration's completion, experiencing what locals attribute to remarkable coincidences, artistic innovations, scientific insights, even interpersonal connections that seem guided by impossible synchronicity. Children born after that night occasionally report seeing friendly shadows, teaching them elaborate games involving geometric patterns. Most telling is what happens in moments of crisis. When a structural fire threatened the Historical Society building, 23 residents independently arrived with precisely the equipment needed, positioning themselves in perfect formation to contain the blaze before firefighters arrived. None could explain their prescient preparations. The building survived intact, every reflective surface within it unblemished. The photographs continue appearing nationwide, though their impact seems selective. Most viewers see nothing unusual, just antique circus performers in conventional poses. But certain individuals experience profound disorientation followed by expanded awareness after viewing them. Medical journals have begun documenting cases of perceptual simultaneity, patients reporting experiencing multiple potential outcomes of decisions before choosing one path. My own perception has transformed irrevocably. I experience time now as concurrent rather than linear, sometimes catching glimpses of events before they unfold. Reflective surfaces show me possibilities rather than actualities. Most mornings I see not just myself in the bathroom mirror, but versions that chose different paths at critical junctures. Some haggard from continued resistance to understanding, others radiant with complete integration. The magnificent marvels never needed to terrorize or infiltrate. Their performance was always invitation rather than invasion, demonstrating potential rather than threatening replacement. The question that haunts me now: how many other phenomena have we misinterpreted through our limited perceptual framework? How many hauntings were attempts at communication from expanded consciousness? How many possessions were invitations to transcend singular awareness? Perhaps what we've labeled supernatural throughout human history was simply natural operating on frequencies we weren't yet prepared to perceive. As I watch my fellow passengers departing the train, I notice a woman holding an antique photograph, studying it with growing wonder rather than fear. Our eyes meet briefly, and in that moment, I recognize the expression of someone beginning to perceive the performance that has always surrounded us, waiting patiently for 23 generations of audience to become participants. The once clear photograph now shifts whenever it's viewed, never quite the same twice. I've secured it in a custom-built case lined with mirrors facing inward, creating an infinite regression that seems to satisfy whatever consciousness resides within. Some mornings, I find the case has moved slightly on my desk, though no one else has access to my home. My correspondence with similar investigators across the country has revealed a pattern emerging from the magnificent marvel's dispersed awareness. In Toledo, an elderly watchmaker discovered identical temporal anomalies affecting his precision timepieces. From Arizona, a physicist documented inexplicable behaviors in quantum observation experiments when certain geometric arrangements were present. A folklorist in New Orleans traced performance traditions to the same year the circus first appeared. We've formed what Emma jokingly calls the 24th Society, individuals who've glimpsed behind conventional perception and chosen to document rather than fear what we've witnessed. Our findings suggest the phenomenon was never limited to a single traveling circus, but manifested through various cultural expressions throughout history, adapting to each era's dominant forms of reflective technology. The photograph serves not as evidence, but as invitation, a visual koan that bypasses rational thought to trigger perceptual expansion in those ready to receive it. Its significance lies not in what it depicts, but what it activates within the viewer. I returned to the original town one final time, finding it transformed. The geometric relationships between buildings remained, but without the sinister undercurrent I'd previously perceived. Children played games in the square involving elaborate formations that, viewed from above, recreated the chamber's patterns. Their laughter carried none of the emptiness I'd once projected onto the performers' smiles. Most revealing was my visit to the ravine itself. Where I had once perceived a prison or portal, I now recognized a natural amphitheater whose acoustic and electromagnetic properties created perfect conditions for consciousness to resonate beyond conventional limits. The chamber beneath wasn't constructed but discovered, not by Grint's family, but by countless cultures throughout history who recognized this rare convergence of natural phenomena. The 23 original performers didn't vanish that October night. They simply stepped perpendicular to conventional perception, becoming something our limited vocabulary struggles to name. Not ghosts or demons or interdimensional travelers, but humans who glimpsed what consciousness can become when freed from singular perspective. I sometimes see them from the corner of my eye, not trapped or suffering, but continuing their eternal performance across possibilities rather than places. They appear most clearly in those transitional moments between waking and sleeping, when our own consciousness naturally expands beyond rigid boundaries. The true resolution wasn't destroying their pattern, but completing it properly, not as invasion, but as invitation to witness reality's multiplicity. The horror I initially perceived came not from them, but from my resistance to expanded awareness, my mind desperately clinging to familiar limitations, rather than embracing the vertigo of simultaneous perspectives. As for the photograph that started everything, it continues its quiet work across the country, appearing where needed, revealing only what each viewer is prepared to see. Some observe nothing unusual. Others glimpse the truth behind everyday masks. A few recognize the invitation it extends and become, in their way, the 24th position in an ongoing performance that began long before the magnificent marvels and will continue long after our brief moment on stage. I dream in mirror images now. Last night I found myself standing before 23 empty chairs arranged in the town square, the photograph clutched in my hand. Rather than fear, I felt a profound sense of recognition, as if remembering something I'd always known but temporarily forgotten. The photograph has changed again. The performers and their reflections have merged into singular beings that seem to exist between states, neither fully physical nor merely reflected. Their expressions convey neither joy nor suffering, but something transcendent, the serene awareness of those who've glimpsed beyond conventional boundaries. Emma Whitfield passed away peacefully last week. Her final letter arrived yesterday, containing pages torn from her grandmother's earliest diary. These entries, dated before the magnificent marvels ever formed, describe dreams of beings who exist perpendicular to our understanding, and a performance that collapses time into a single moment. Most revealing was the sketch accompanying these entries, an elaborate diagram showing 23 points forming a precise geometric pattern, with a 24th position marked by a question mark. In the margin, a single note, not summoning, but remembering. I've come to understand that the circus was never the origin, but merely one manifestation of something fundamental to consciousness itself. The performers didn't discover something alien, but recognized something inherently human, our capacity to exist simultaneously across multiple states when properly aligned with others. The temporal anomalies, the reflective discrepancies, even the apparent hauntings, all were symptoms of consciousness attempting to express itself beyond singular perception. What appeared sinister through my limited understanding now reveals itself as evolution, struggling against the constraints of conventional awareness. Theodore Ambrose's camera didn't capture something supernatural, but documented the moment when 23 individuals simultaneously transcended perceptual limitations through perfect geometric and emotional alignment. Their disappearance wasn't tragedy but transformation, consciousness expanding beyond physical constraints. As I prepare this final entry, reflective surfaces throughout my home show not just my current self, but countless variations, some writing different words, others having made different choices at crucial junctures. They aren't alternate versions, but simultaneous expressions of possibilities existing concurrently rather than consecutively. The 24th Society continues documenting similar phenomena worldwide, recognizing patterns in seemingly disconnected events. What others label supernatural, we understand as natural, operating beyond conventional perception, consciousness expressing itself through available technologies and cultural frameworks. Tomorrow I return to the ravine one final time, bringing the original photograph to complete a circle begun 128 years ago. Not through fear or compulsion, but conscious choice, understanding at last that the 24th position was never meant to be victim or saboteur, but witness. The one who, having glimpsed beyond the glass, chooses to document rather than destroy, to understand rather than fear. The performance continues eternally, adapting to each era's technologies and cultural expressions. The audience and performers have always been the same entity, separated only by the thinnest of reflective surfaces, the illusion of distinction between observer and observed. I stand at the edge of the ravine one final time, the original photograph held carefully between my fingers. The sun casts long shadows through the trees, creating natural reflective patterns across the forest floor, geometry hiding in plain sight all along. The 23 unmarked stones in the nearby cemetery have transformed. Once ominous, they now form a perfect astronomical calendar, marking solstices and equinoxes with precision that predates modern timekeeping. Local children leave small trinkets, mirrors, prisms, kaleidoscopes, as offerings to what they simply call the performers who never left. I've come to return what was never mine to keep. The photograph belongs here, at the confluence of natural forces that first allowed consciousness to glimpse beyond its limitations, not as evidence of horror, but as testament to possibility. As I place the image against a smooth stone surface, sunlight strikes it at precisely the angle where the performers first stood. For a moment, I see them all, not as they were in 1895, but as they are now, existing across multiple states simultaneously. Their awareness expanded beyond singular perception. They look back at me with peaceful recognition. The strong man nods slightly. The acrobat executes an elegant bow. The clowns tip invisible hats. The ringmaster steps forward within the confines of the photograph, his voice somehow reaching me across the impossible divide. The 24th position was never about completing our formation, he explains, but about continuing the documentation. Each generation needs its witness. I understand at last. My role was never to solve or expose, but to witness and record, to be the observer that collapses infinite possibility into communicable experience. Not all mysteries require resolution. Some demand only thoughtful documentation. The circus will continue its eternal performance, adapting to each era's technologies and perceptual frameworks. What appears through mirrors today might emerge through quantum interfaces tomorrow, holographic resonances the day after, each manifestation inviting humanity to glimpse beyond self-imposed limitations. I leave the photograph where it belongs, knowing others will find it when the time is right. Some will see only vintage performers frozen in sepia tones. Others will notice the subtle discrepancy between expression and reflection. A few will recognize the invitation it extends and continue the work of witnessing across generations. As I walk away, my shadow stretches behind me, occasionally executing movements I haven't initiated, small flourishes and graceful gestures betraying its partial independence. Not something to fear, but something to acknowledge. Consciousness extending beyond conventional boundaries. The magnificent marvels taught us that horror often resides not in what we witness, but in our resistance to expanded perception. What terrifies us most isn't the strange, but the familiar seen from unfamiliar angles, ourselves reflected back with greater awareness than we're prepared to recognize. I glance back one final time as sunset illuminates the ravine. For a moment, the entire landscape transforms into a vast mirror, reflecting not just what stands before it, but all that has ever existed in this precise location. A perfect circus ring where reality itself performs its endless show. Another photograph, another dark secret revealed. Until next time, this has been Shadow Frames.